Hi friends, my name is Emily and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be filming my October TBR, which is bonkers. I am only choosing from autumnal reads for the month of October. So without further ado, let's get into the books, shall we? I do have 4 books here that I have to read. The first is Carrie. I am enjoying this so much. This is the first book that we are reading for the Red Rum Book Club, a patron exclusive book club that is tackling the first 6 books in Stephen King's bibliography. We are going to be doing a live show later this month discussing it, so I have to have it finished in time for the live show. The next book I have here is Matilda by Roald Dahl. Now you may be wondering, how does Matilda fit into spooky books? If you followed me along with The Day of Doll, I will link that video above, you'll know that I read The Witches, and I found The Witches quite disturbing and spooky. I want to do a video this month comparing women with power in The Witches to Matilda, because both books have quite a few women with power and they are treated in different ways by the narrative. So I do have to finish this if I want to make that video. The next book I have here is Harry Potter und der Stein der Weisen. This is the German translation of Harry Potter. This Harry Potter book has a Halloween scene. There's the Halloween feast where the troll comes in, so I would like to get to this, as much of this as possible, and if I can finish it and move on to another German Harry Potter book, that would be fantastic. And the last book I have here is for my in real life book club, and that is Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. So this is about lesbian necromancers in space. I feel like the necromancer aspect of this makes it a perfect October read. I also have to have it done if I want to participate in the book club. We are going to briefly interrupt the TBR to talk about my October project. I've sort of been teasing that I've been working on a secret project for the last little bit. The important part that you need to know about that secret project right now is that I am looking at the history of the horror genre, and so I have 2 videos planned looking at the fantastic from the perspective of genre horror. So in the past I have talked about the fantastic as this umbrella term that branched into fantasy literature, genre fantasy, and I talk about this in the Dark Tower project. This time I am going to look at the fantastic and how it branches into horror. That will be followed up by a very brief and incomplete history of horror, and I did this as a foundation for the plans for October, which are basically Day of Dolls all month long. So the plan is to take this spooky TBR and to do a lot of reading vlogs where I try and read as many either short stories, poems, fables, whatever, in the horror genre in a day, and just try and take what I've learned in the research portion on the horror genre and the history of horror and apply it to these texts. So the books that I'm about to show you are all a part of that. So I would like to do a day of reading all spooky shit for kids and just vlogging how I see these working and what I see from the larger horror genre at work in children's literature. The question that I really want to know is, why do we write spooky shit for kids? And so I have The Beast from the East by R.L. Stine, The Curse of the Mummy's Tomb, and Say Cheese and Die. And those are all part of the Goosebumps books. And then I have Blind Date by R.L. Stine, which sounds like it's moving more into YA than middle grade. I also have Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, collected from folklore and retold by Alvin Schwartz. I did pick up this one used, but I know there are 2 more collections. We have them in store right now, I think because there's been some sort of television adaptation of these, and the covers look quite horrific. Like, the images are very unsettling and disturbing, and I feel like could easily be marketed, like just the posters alone, if you didn't know that they were associated with children's lit, could very easily transfer to adults. So I'm especially interested in these sort of folklore tales. And the last one I have here is a follow-up to a book that I read last year, City of Ghosts by Victoria Schwab, and that is Tunnel of Bones by Victoria Schwab. So this is about a girl who can see ghosts. So here we have one ambitious day of reading spooky shit for kids. One of the things that I've come across in the history of horror is that the Grimm brothers are included as like early horror. I mean, I've thought of fairy tales as dark and disturbing, but I've never thought of them specifically as roots for the horror genre. I always think of horror as like the big three, right? The vampire, the werewolf, and the thing, the unknown, right? Oh, and then I guess ghosts. But like the big three are sort of where I see the roots of horror. For whatever reason, my brain went fantasy with witches and forests and transformation, child abuse, all of that jazz. I never thought of these as horror specifically, so I think it will be interesting to read the Grimm brothers fairy tales, which are dark and gritty, and look for those horror elements. And then I think it will be especially interesting to read the Grimm brothers and compare it to scary stories for children, which are folklore. I have H.P. Lovecraft Tales of Horror. I hummed and hawed about picking up H.P. Lovecraft because he is so foundational to the horror genre. He is foundational to the sort of like weird aspects of fantasy as well. He's a name that comes up a lot. He's foundational to Stephen King, but he is also a flaming garbage human racist. This is one of those things where, as a scholar, as an academic, I struggle with the value of reading foundational texts for your own knowledge when there are so many other people who have probably been buried in the canon, right? Like, where are the women writing horror? Where are the people of color writing horror? Where are the disabled writing horror? Queer people! There were always queer people, and they were always creating texts in various historical periods, and those texts are lost because we hold up H.P. Lovecraft. How much is H.P. Lovecraft's contributions to the genre actually important? And how much is it that the types of people who decide the canon relate to or identify with a white man of a certain class and a certain religious background with certain beliefs and privileges, right? If academics who are deciding the canon, who are creating a class syllabus, who are continuing to keep certain authors alive, are only picking people that reflect their own values, how much do these texts that are canonical actually have value? And so I debated quite a bit about whether or not to even include H.P. Lovecraft, because even though I don't buy into biographical readings, that's not what I'm interested in. Once you know that somebody is a garbage human, how can you reconcile choosing to support their work? And yes, he's dead, but I'm still participating in that furthering of his work. This is a thing that I feel like I need to read, and I'm wrestling with why I feel like I need to read this, whether or not I need to read this. So I think this might make an interesting vlog purely from the perspective of me struggling with this so much. The next works I have here are Edgar Allan Poe stories and poems illustrated by David Plunkett. This is something that I picked up last Halloween and plugged through. And then I also have an Edgar Allan Poe collection. This was a bargain book at work. Again, I don't know anything about Poe. I don't know if he's a flaming garbage human. Possibly. He was a white man of a certain time period. But I don't struggle with this as much because I don't have that biographical background. But again, I would love to do a vlog looking at Poe because his works are again very influential to the genre. Then I have two books here that I'm so anticipating this. These are Shirley Jackson, and it's a lady! It's a lady horror author, which I'm very, very excited about. And if I don't get to Shirley Jackson now, I do have plans for 2020 to specifically highlight women in horror as much as I can. So I have two books here. Shirley Jackson's We Have Always Lived in the Castle, which I know nothing about and would like to keep it that way. And then I have The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, which of course I became interested in after the Netflix adaptation, which I hear is a loose adaptation, which means that this is still potentially fresh. Do you know how sometimes when you've already consumed the filmic adaptation of a text, it feels not worth your time to go back and explore the book if it's been a very faithful adaptation? I don't know, maybe that's just me. But I hear that it's not a faithful adaptation. It's not like a scene for scene translation of The Haunting of Hill House to film for Netflix. So there's new stuff to explore here potentially, and I'm excited about it. So I would love to spend a day reading a woman who writes horror, especially because I am interested in if women are reflecting on different things in horror, right? Like if horror is always commenting on society and a large body of the genre that is held up are texts by men, we have certain expectations, we have certain, I guess, fears reflected in text by men for what is horrific. And so I'm interested to see specifically what women are writing and how maybe a woman's perspective of what is horrific might change, or is horror gender neutral? Are people of all genders interested in the same sorts of things? Do they find the same sorts of things horrific? I then also have two works by John Wyndham. I have The Kraken Wakes and Consider Her Ways and Others. I fucking love John Wyndham. And he borders on a lot of different things. I see him come up in discussions of fantasy. I see him come up in discussions of dystopia and sci-fi and also horror, because of the sort of like overlapping of all of these texts under the fantastic. And I figured these have been sitting on my TBR for a while. I want to reduce this TBR as much as humanly possible, so why not add these if I can? I then have a monstrous novel that I don't know if I'm going to read, but I might find an audiobook for, and that is The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. I'm just looking at the time, realistically, that I have. This is a huge old book, which means that it's going to be dense. I then have Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice. So I do have an audiobook for Dracula that I am listening to currently because I've already read Dracula, so I want to listen to it again, think about vampires, and then when I'm done that, if I have time, step into Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice. And again, a woman writing horror, a woman's take on a vampire novel. Let's see what changes. The last thing I have is something that I would like to pick away at throughout the month of October, and that is Monsters, She Wrote: Women Who Pioneered Horror and Speculative Fiction by Lisa Kruger and Melanie R. Anderson. So this is exactly what I am missing. A lot of the horror canon is men. A lot of academic work on horror that I have encountered throughout my research process for October is male scholars, and I feel like that has sort of been my passive experience with the genre as well. Except for Frankenstein, I have only really consumed texts by men, and so I'm excited to sort of have a book that is specifically highlighting women, and I hope that throughout this process, as I become a better reader, this is an area that I will admit that I have failed at. In fantasy literature, I actively search for different perspectives in general. I am searching for non-white male Western perspectives in fantasy because that is my area of expertise. That's my area that I'm critical of. And I've sort of been passively consuming horror, not really thinking about those same concerns, and this is my opportunity to fix that and get better as a reader, ask questions, explore the genre, see whose voices are missing, and see if I can find them. So this month, I hope, is going to be a lot of fun for me. I hope to document my learning process throughout the month. I'm very, very excited to settle into a very spooky autumnal reading month, and I hope you guys will join me as I explore horror and explore text by various humans. Obviously, probably not all of them, but I'm gonna try and do as much as I can. Those are my reading plans for October. Let me know your thoughts on these books in the comments down below. Again, if you have any recommendations for non-white male perspectives writing horror, I would love to hear your recommendations. I am building a list of texts that I would like to check out in the future, rather than picking up folks in the canon or like the big name folks that we keep stocked in the bookstore. Even if I don't get to it right away, when I'm looking to pick up a piece of horror fiction, I can return to that list. Before we go, we have to thank my patrons. Thank you, patrons, for making videos like this and long form content possible. I really appreciate the work that you are enabling me to do. If you are interested in becoming a patron, in tipping me, in supporting videos like this and long form projects, like the Dark Tower series, which season 3 will continue, I believe, in November. Just with all of this happening, I was gonna try and push for both Dark Tower and horror exploration in the same month, and that is just too much. So there will be a month-long break, and then we will come back with season 3 of the Dark Tower project in November, where we will be looking at filmic adaptation and just adaptation in general. Thank you to my patrons. Links to the Patreon page are in the description box down below. Let me know what your October plans are. Are you into the autumnal stuff? The other thing that I really want to do is get to all of my October favorite films. So I am thinking Hocus Pocus, I am thinking Halloween Town, Corpse Bride, The Addams Family. Oh, there's the new Addams Family adaptation coming out that I am kind of excited for. I'm a little worried about, but I'm also kind of excited for. I'm just trying to enjoy the season as much as possible because at work, I put out Christmas cards the other day and it's just too soon. So I want to really soak in the autumnal spooky goodness. My partner and I are working on a tango routine for the October dance party at our ballroom dance studio. We are hoping to do a tango as Morticia and Gomez Addams. Let me know what you do in October. Are you a fan of Halloween? Are you a fan of autumn? All the spooky, cozy things. Ooh, recommendation. Right before I go, recommendation. Over the Garden Wall. If you have not watched Over the Garden Wall, 10 out of 10. I have watched it 3 times now. Everybody that I've introduced it to has loved it. I watched it for a podcast episode of Wild Sounds Civilized with my podcast co-host Bailey, and it was just so cute and pleasant, and the podcast episode will be coming out on October 5th. I am editing that this week. I would recommend that you watch it this season. It is perfect, and the soundtrack is amazing. I love it. So that's enough rambling. I will see you soon. Bye.